You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Hello. Welcome to the Mushie Moment for Tuesday, January 17th, 2023. We are coming to you live here from the Pace Radio Network, as well as cbgtv.com. And we stream to Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Boxcast locations like Roku and Fire Stick. And yeah, that's kind of us in a nutshell. Say hello to my co-host, Steve Mather. How you doing this morning, Steve?
I am doing great.
It's afternoon now, isn't it, for you?
Well, yes, because we start right at noon.
Yeah. So how was your morning then?
It was really good. Got prepped up for the show here. Just getting excited. I love the fact that we've got this podcast going and the guests that we're currently getting on board.
It's exciting. I like that people are reaching out to us and suggesting that they would like to be part of it by being a guest. It's really kind of a nice feeling.
We're in that time of inspiration where things are opening up and podcasts like this are allowed to happen, and that's a beautiful thing. You're spreading information on all of this and the healing. Wow. That's all I got is wow. Thank you.
Yeah. The universe really, it's helped us along, to be honest, because we were saying just before the show, what we kind of said, about 4 weeks ago ish, so what are we going to do? And here we are on show number 2 already.
Yeah. And what did you say you wanted before we did this show?
I said, I asked the universe if our little room that we have behind this show could reach a certain amount of people. And we got it +1.
That's pretty awesome.
It is. That really just put a great big smile on my face when I woke up this morning and saw that. Not that I really count numbers, but the fact that I put it out there that it would be really nice to hit this number before Tuesday's show, and the universe said, yeah, okay. Not a problem.
Yeah, it seems to be having our back on spreading the information and spreading the love.
Yeah, it sure does. It sure does. So I mean, this is our second show. We have a pretty cool guest coming on today, I think.
Speaking of spreading the love from the Festival of Love and the Year of Love.
Yeah. This guest wasn't just there at Woodstock. This guest had something to do with the security and something to do with helping to organize it and keep it flowing. Our guest was, kind of in the middle of the psychedelic revolution of the 60s, and then sat there and watched the festival of the psychedelic revolution happen in 1969, and it's really cool. So he's been able to watch it happen since then and go from the first one that was quashed in the 60s, come the 70s, they quashed that. And now he's watching it happen all over again.
Yeah, he's pretty impressed and happy that the psychedelic revolution is getting another wave, so to speak. He was, we'll save some of that.
Yeah,
we'll say some of it for later this year, but there's some pretty amazing stuff, and he's at the forefront, and he's in amongst some of the pioneers, and he watches it get crushed, and he's actually got a Woodstock movement happening to bring forth the ideals that that Woodstock was created around, and what the foundation was. So
yeah, that's really exciting.
I'm pretty excited to bring him on.
Yeah. And not just that. I mean, he's somebody that we know in person, have sat there face to face and smoked a joint with, which is really kind of cool.
Yeah, and took him out to do some jamming when he was in town, and yeah,
it was really kind of cool.
we might
So,
even get him to play some music for
well,
us.
yeah, if we're lucky, you know what I mean? If we're lucky. But we're gonna start off with just bringing him on and hearing a little bit about what it was like in the 60s.
Oh,
Hey.
here I am.
Hi, Greg.
Hey, how you guys doing?
We're doing
Fantastic. How are you?
awesome.
I love this. It's like, because I got to hang out. Well, Steve and I met just last June. We were part of the crew putting on the historic Slocan City Hotel grand opening extravaganza, where Gene Greenwood and Steve streamed. I think you streamed for like close to 40 hours or something insane like that.
Oh, it was amazing. It was 5 different venue areas with bands playing and just running, everything streaming one to the next, to the next, to the next. And it was pretty amazing. John the Tornado and the Slocan City Hotel organized that up, and it was just monster.
Yep, they're planning on doing an international festival this year, and in June, same weekend, and I'm booked for that, so I'm looking forward to that. Unless I'm back east doing the Woodstock thing, but I'll talk about that later. But yeah, it was great working with Steve, and then we got to be friends, and Steve's helping me out with some medicinal products to help me get through a challenging situation in my medical life. And then I got to meet Cindy because I was down visiting, and she happened to be in from Nova Scotia doing whatever the heck you were doing back then. I don't think you slept at all while you were there. I didn't. You were like, well, I got to go here and I'm going there. And then, but it's great. And well, I caught your show last week and it kind of inspired me to reach out to Steve because you were talking about the use of psychotropic drugs in medicine and the treatment of PST and assorted things. And it occurred to me that it's very similar to what Tim Leary was doing at Harvard back in the very early 60s, and a lot of people studying in it. And most of those studies were pretty much shut down by the universities. They just didn't want to deal with it. And then soon after that, the drugs got into the recreational market. I grew up on the East Coast, so I was more influenced by Timothy Leary and the people from the Neo-American Church, which is based in northern New York State, than I would say the Owsley Summer of Love type of stuff. We on the East Coast, I don't want to call the West Coast people because I love them and I'm one of them anyway. But it wasn't as flaky, if you know what I mean. We had to keep our stuff together a bit more because. Like the town I grew up in, we had the village police, the town police, the county sheriff, the state police, special investigation stuff. And then because we were next to an Air Force base in the United States Military Academy, we also had federal cops. So there was about 8 layers of police working independently to interfere with our lifestyle, so to speak. So we didn't run around like with the really long hair that much. I mean, we had long hair, but we didn't like the hippie clothes. If you look at the Woodstock pictures, most people are dressed like you and me and Steve right now. We weren't like all, tie-dyed out. There was tie-dye, don't get me wrong, but I'm just comparing the East Coast to the West Coast because a lot of people get confused on that. They were very different. It was more warm and fuzzy on the West Coast. It was more accepted. San Francisco really adopted the culture, and New York State did not adopt our culture at all. The New York State police were pretty much somehow.
It's a good thing they've changed and relaxed so much.
Oh yeah, right. I don't know. I haven't been there in a while, but I'm always. Defer to the safe side when I'm dealing with law enforcement and stuff like that. Of course, I don't do anything criminal now. They went legalized pot here in Canada, and I was going to quit because I'd been smoking the damn stuff for 50 years illegally, and then they took all the fun out of it. You can buy it in the store and everything, and they go, ridiculous. But no, seriously, that was a good move. And there are trends towards decriminalizing things here in British Columbia,
But
Canada.
we want to
They're going to
actually
try
go
and
backwards.
experiment.
We want to go backwards to where we were starting. Let's go back to the 60s.
Okay.
We don't want to jump all over the place. We want to go through it from beginning to end. We want to compare the
You
psychedelic
ask and I'll tell.
revolution of the
Yeah.
60s. What was it like back then? And then, like after the break, we'll come back and we'll compare what you saw back then to what is happening now and what we get to see now. Because a lot of the studies are actually very similar. But what was it like? I know from experience, but this is going back to the 80s. One of the things that you said when you sent your bio that caught my eye is the fact that everything was stronger back in the 60s.
Yeah.
Everything. I know a little bit about the LSD, but everything was stronger because it was pure, right?
Yeah, it was serious stuff. We were doing really large doses, and like I said in the bio too, it was totally unregulated. Maybe I can put it in reference of how I got involved with everything. I was like, I think 15 or so, and I'd been visiting California. I came back, and a friend a couple years older than me said, "Hey, I just found this really neat new thing, and it's way better than drinking. You should try it out. It's called marijuana." And it was like, okay, sure, let's try it out. And, it was totally pretty benign and nice and everything. And then it translated, about a year later, it was sort of the same scenario. He said, well, I've come across this new thing that's like really serious. And there's this guy, Tim Leary, and he gave me a copy of Psychedelic Prayers, which was a book that Tim kind of dummied down and Tibetan Taoistic type prayers. So he gave me that. That was an introduction to the mystical side of the movement.
Cool.
And it was quite a bit after that. I think I was probably about 17 or something that I first tried acid. And actually, the first acid I did was on a sugar cube directly from the League of Spiritual Discovery. So that's kind of the old school sugar cube. That was the original way that it was distributed. And then, it was not that many people did acid. It was kind of a, maybe 2 or 3% of my class would have been in that area. And that's another thing that people have to realize about what I guess we're called boomers or something. But the majority of my generation were not hippies. We were actually a relatively small subgroup. And as far as like dedicated people that were actually doing LSD, joining the Back to the Land movement, that was a small percentage is what I'm getting to. So it was a transitionary process. In other words, this came out of nowhere, so to speak, into a culture that was not connected to anything that was like that, right? And I think that was where the radical cultural shift that the psychedelics created, particularly against, amongst my generation, but some people a bit older than me too, of course. It was a really quantum social shift. We were thinking completely different than the establishment in American society.
And because there'd been nothing like that in our community system, right? In a lot of the other cultures, you've got a lot of the indigenous cultures, you've got the plant medicine being used, but because ours had nothing, and the LSD being synthetic when it came out, there's no dosing to gauge off. There's no elder to speak to find out, hey, how much is going to take me to the stars and how much.
Yeah.
You guys were the pioneers in, as we say in the mushroom world.
Yeah,
right? These are the guys that ate the wrong ones and showed us not to eat them.
Oh yeah, it was pretty strange because, like, sometimes you get this acid and it would be like being inside of a lightning storm. It was like really flashy, and I heard theories that maybe it was cut with meth or something. And of course, the infamous strychnine, which is, if it's not made properly, you can get strychnine in the process of making LSD, which is what the brown acid had that at Woodstock. That was the active toxin that was in the brown acid, from what I understand and surmise, was strychnine. And I can share the story of my LSD brown acid story from Woodstock when we talk about Woodstock later. But as far as the societal change,
why wouldn't you share that now?
Well, I can.
The story of the brown acid. I mean, it's one of those stories that it's it's one of those.
Well, just a hands-on what it was like to be at Woodstock moment. Okay, so I was doing security mostly in that big green peripheral area. If you look at aerial photos, just off to the stage right, and it's a fence, and it's quite a large area. And we basically patrolled that, made sure that no one was in there that wasn't supposed to be, or nobody climbed over the fences. And I did spend time doing stage security. But they told us when Wes Pomeroy educated us on our short training session Friday morning, he said, cover your area, but you're free to move around. We want you to be around the site and just keep moving. And if you see something that you can't fix, fuck it. If you can't fix it, fuck it. It's a quote, so I can swear, but basically it was like, don't get caught up in a broken water main. We need you guys to be moving all the time. If you see something, report it to somebody else. The security was super well organized, actually, but not to digress too much. So my partner, friend, John Kopek, and I decided we'd take a trip up the hill. And it was Joan Baez was playing. And so everything was pretty mellow Friday night. And we're walking through the darkness in the going up the hill through all these hundreds of thousands of people. And we had these jackets that were really easy to recognize. They had the big bird and the guitar on the back and stuff like that. So somebody saw us and knew that we were like official Woodstock Ventures people. And this guy came up and he says, "Oh man, we got this guy. He did the bad acid. He did the bad acid. What are we gonna do?" And they were carrying this guy, and there was two guys that were holding him by the shoulders, and one guy was holding him by the legs. And he wasn't on a stretcher, but he looked like he was on a stretcher. Like all his muscles were contracted. His head was tilted back. It was just seized. It was, causes a seizure, right? So we pointed out where the medical evac tent was, which was just by the Performers Pavilion off to, behind the stage, and off they went. So it was like a case study in how we didn't escort them over there. The people at that event, everybody, well, almost everybody, was looking out for each other. In other words, it was like this coalescive spirit. And I think that is why Woodstock has become so iconic. And we did not expect it. I didn't think it was anything other than a great big event. And hopefully we didn't get in too much trouble for having it. Until a year later, my wife and a girlfriend at the time, whatever, we were hitchhiking back from Canada, and we were going through Portland. It was the middle of the night, and we were going to go camp out. Like there was a place you could kind of camp out under the bushes or something like that. You got to remember there were very few homeless people back there, so we were the homeless people. Anyhow, we were just about to go up, and this car pulls up in Portland. I don't know if you've ever been in Portland, but they got all this maze of stuff. So if you get off on the wrong freeway ramp, it's not like you're on a major free. Like we were off somewhere, I don't know where. Anyway, they took us back to their place, and we're sitting around. One of the guys was pretty redneck. He was a Vietnam War supporter, and the other two just seemed like a nice couple. And Renee and I are sitting there, and then she mentioned something about me being at Woodstock, right? Next thing I know, they're all sitting on the floor like little kids wanting to hear stories. They were like, oh. And, and that was when I had my first inkling that, wait a minute, there's something more going on here. Why are these people so intrigued with this event? Because I just assumed that it was just going to be, it was a big rock concert like Monterey Pop or something. It wasn't like I mean, Monterey Pop was great, but it isn't part of the American cultural fabric the same way Woodstock's become. Um,
So
so yeah,
let's go back. Let's go back to these 4 people have come up to you. One of them is passed out. He's having seizures. You direct them to the medical tent, and now what do you have to do?
we kept moving, looking
And
for just like
looking for
cops on
brown acid.
patrol. No, not specifically. We're looking for anything or
Yeah.
nothing. We're
Well,
just.
what call did you make? Did you just send them over and just continue on, or did you
Oh yeah.
let people know
Oh,
that?
there was we didn't have any communication. I mean, a few of the promoters had walkie-talkies and stuff, but we had no, there was no way we could tell anything. There was no cell phones. There was no, I mean, I couldn't phone up and say, hey, we got a guy coming in with brown acid. Everything had to be, kind of winged, so to speak, on the fly. So, and the security thing was actually one of the ways it was kept together was Wes Pomeroy, who was an ex law enforcement person and brilliant guy. And he or somebody else from security, like let's say we're down in our normal area, somebody would come over about every hour or 2 or 3, and what they'd do is they'd update us on everything that was happening. What was Governor Rockefeller and the evacuation, or the National Guard, or the traffic, or anything they had to share. And then we shared with him what we had observed, right? Then he went to the next bunch of people with our information added in and updated them. So it was kind of like, the old, maybe back in the medieval days, the courier goes around and gets information from different castles and just keeps passing it around. But it was very effective because we really didn't have much security. Just to wrap up the security situation, on Thursday night, we had hired 275 New York City policemen to be security. And on Thursday night, the New York City Police Commissioner dug out the rule book and dug in and said, okay, that's fine, but anybody, NYPD members cannot do outside security. And if you do outside security at this festival, you're going to lose your job. So I think all of but about 5 of them left. So when we got to the site Friday morning, we found out we were going to be doing security, like pretty much in key positions, because we were actually employees. We were known entities, so they put us in very key positions. And that's when we had the meeting with Wes, and he kind of educated us on the protocol. But I had no idea, until I got to the site, that that's what I was going to do. I didn't know what I was going to do on the festival. I was just going to wander around, and I knew I had a free ticket. Of course, everybody had a free ticket, but yeah, it was interesting. But even the way the security ran it goes to the bigger picture of the way the cohesiveness of all the 500,000 people, and maybe another couple 100,000 that were out on the road that never made it. But I'm sure they were doing their own thing too.
And they were all, pretty much everybody was on some sort of psychedelic medicine. Back then, we called it a psychedelic drug. I mean, today we call it a psychedelic medicine, but there was a lot of that around.
There was a lot of psychedelics available. I would say 80-90% of the crowd was definitely smoking pot or hash, and maybe half of that, maybe 30-40%, maybe a bit more, it's impossible to tell, actually did acid or mushrooms or something like that. There wasn't that much mushrooms around on the East Coast then. It was pretty much an LSD type of thing. And most of the acid was quite good. I mean, no one's ever really brought it up, but it's an interesting question of like, where did the brown acid come from? Who brought the brown acid? Why did they bring the brown acid? Did they know it was bad? I mean, what was the nefarious, because it's always a story. I mean, somebody brought that acid there, and I got theories, but I'm not going to speculate.
Yeah, it's one of those folklore stories that has come from Woodstock. I mean, I remember younger when I first started getting into psychedelic medicines, and of course back then I looked at them as psychedelic drugs. Let's go pop some acid and go to go to the fair and get on the rides. It's a blast.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, it really was. Didn't know that I was medicating myself, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's the big folklore joke when you first start getting into it. Everybody tells you, don't take the brown acid. And you know, we all realize where it comes from, and of course, it's not meant to be a joke because there are serious repercussions to it. Obviously.
Well, yeah. If there was anything positive that came out of it, because something positive comes out of everything, even negative things, it probably cut back on a number of people doing acid, because it wasn't the really. I wouldn't suggest it. Woodstock being all that good an atmosphere for the average person to be doing LSD in, because it was already totally crazy, and that's where we had an inordinate amount of freakouts, bad trips, whichever you want to call it, because a lot of people got there and it was dark and crazy. They didn't know where they were. You know, I mean, they'd never been there before, and all of a sudden you get somewhere and there's 500,000 people and there's like no services, and we didn't have much of anything for crowd lighting, so I mean everybody was in the dark. And then somebody gives them some acid. Maybe they never done acid, and then they do acid, and they're like standing in the dark, and the Grateful Dead's playing something nobody can understand, and they just friggin' lose it. You know, I mean, give me a break.
So I never ever looked it up. Who do you know where the term freaking out was coined?
Oh, well, I'm pretty sure it was coined on the West Coast, but beyond that, probably sounds like an LA type of term, you know. I mean, Zappa popularized it, you know, somewhat. But no, I'm not really sure. Pretty apropos word in a way.
Was it being used at Woodstock, or was it used after Woodstock?
Oh no, way before. Oh, at least a couple.
Before.
Yeah, no, it was in the vocabulary, so to speak. And there was two things that would happen if somebody had a bad trip. Well, three things. One is that their friends would help them get through it, or they get through it on their own. And in the more extreme cases, the first was to take them to the hog farm, and Lisa Law and her husband Tom had this thing called the trip tent, which they took around to all the different events that they went to, because they were quite strong believers in psychedelic medicine. Also based in New Mexico and everything. They were in touch with the indigenous people as well. But the trip tent was your standard protocol where you talk somebody down. You know, you deflect their psychosis. I've had to do that. We got dosed one time at a place called Wheeler's Ranch in California, and my partner had a serious freak out. Of course, I'm stoned out of my mind too. So trying to walk her through a freak out and bring her down, and it's everybody's freak out's different, but it's somewhat schizophrenic, because there's these personality changes. Like they'll be fine and then they'll go off in something. But anyhow, the more severe cases, they go to the medical tent, like I mentioned earlier, and I think they had Thorazine, and if it was a brown acid thing, they probably evac'd them to a hospital because they were dealing with a poison at that particular point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's nice to hear that those tents were available back then for these festivals, right?
Oh yeah.
And that they looked after the people that were having a really hard time. Yeah, my cats love to be on camera. This one is Angel.
Hey, Angel.
Yeah.
I don't blame her.
That's funny. Just
yeah, I think
I'm sauntering over. Hello.
Yeah, it makes it kind of homey. You know, my cat's out chasing rats or something like she's supposed to. There was a lot of people that did have respect for the drug, and in general, I think most people did. You know what I mean? The awareness that it was a very, very powerful being. You know, like I say, the percentage of people that did acid more than once or twice is probably really quite small. You know, it didn't suit most personality types unless you have pretty strong personality or just like the buzz. It's hard to say, you know, like you're trying to go per capita type of thing. But the movement was definitely, I think the acceleration of the enlightenment that LSD was behind, I think that a lot of the more progressive thoughts and ideas that came out of that particular movement. And that particular movement also, how much of it had to do with acid? Would the movement happen without acid? Is one of those rhetorical questions that nobody's going to know. It's like the classic, would you be different if you had never done psychedelics? Well, that's kind of a, probably more than likely, like, duh, you know.
Yeah.
Hey, Greg.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to go to a commercial break here pretty soon.
We're actually getting there. I was just about to interrupt and say that, like the psychedelic revolution back then was really cool, and then very soon after Woodstock, it came to a screeching halt.
Soon after, within a few years.
Yeah, to a screeching halt. Everything was put on, schedules. It was criminalized, and experiments or studies that were like following it back then for different things, and they were all kind of hidden. They were put back in a box and they were put away, and that's the kind of stuff that I'd like to talk about when we come back.
I do too.
That's where you start getting into the underground and whatnot, and I think you probably have a lot of stories about that. But I got to click some buttons. I'm not going to let you talk. I'm going to keep interrupting you, because if I let you talk again, I know that we'll be back on another big conversation. I really got to take us to break.
No, I like this stuff.
So it is break time. It is time to medicate. Steve and I will be right back with our amazing guest, Greg here very, very shortly. The cat is now gone. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in just a couple.
Take a medicated break.
A medicated break.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
When you think of the number of unique products developed in the fields, kitchens, and labs at Legacy 420, it's hard to think that one stands out above the rest. But tell that to the thousands of people who have tried this amazing breakthrough product.
This is our Sacred Salve. This is actually our extra strength. It comes in 5 different strengths. It's all natural, all organic. It typically works within 10 to 15 minutes of putting it on. It's good for arthritis, it's good for inflammation, any kind of pain. We're very proud of it.
Sacred Salve, so easy to apply, along with soothing relief. To select a strength that's right for you, come in and talk to your trusted partner. Legacy 420 out on your road.
Pace Radio Network. By patients, for patients, and for those who want to know.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more. We've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Let's share PACE everywhere. That way it can help create peace. People everywhere advocating cannabis education. You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
And we are back from our medication session. You are live here with the Mushie Moment. And we are here live at paceradio.net, cbgtv.com, and on your Roku or Fire TV. Welcome back, everybody. And of course, I am here with my joint host because I know how to do this and point the right way. And Steve is still trying to figure it out. So I'm going to point to him. And
I got it.
I am here with my joint host, Steve Mather, and we are joined by our guest and our good friend, Craig Walter down below us. Look, he's got that one. That's amazing. So welcome back. And we wanted to head into, okay, so the government has decided to close its eyes. It's brought all of the studies to a shrieking halt, and everything has gone underground. What was it like?
Yeah, I mean, it had been underground from the beginning. The use of drug laws to suppress social groups goes back to marijuana and say the Black community in particular, back into the 20s and 30s or 40s. The environment that I was dealing with, they didn't like us at all. I mean, anybody with long hair had probably been accosted in the locker room at some point by. The culture did not like us at all, and the cops didn't like us even more. And Richard Nixon had a particular bent against the movement for his own reasons, and that was where the LSD became a Class 1 felony. Was that somebody suggested to Dickie Boy that one way to get to the hippies is to make their drugs really, really illegal. I don't know how much of a dent that really put in things. It made the dealers probably a bit more exclusive. I mean, because it was more dangerous, of course, probably up the price too, supply and demand. But the social suppression, like when I lived in California, if I wanted to go to New York, you took I-80 and you didn't get off I-80. It was too dangerous to get off I-80 if you were an identifiable hippie. Right. In the wintertime, sometimes we take Route 66, which was still Route 66, which was pretty cool, actually. But you'd go through these little Chicano little towns, and they split the highway. So there's one way and one way like that, it's two streets. And the cops would sit there and just watch. And if they saw a hippie or something looked like a hippie, they'd pull them over instantly. So there was a lot of duress in our direction on a social level, specifically to the drugs. The drugs were an extension of our culture. They weren't our culture; they were an extension of our culture. So therefore, they were attacking us or repressing us through the use of their drug laws. So yeah, you had to be pretty savvy about it. And different areas, of course, were different. I lived in a town in Northern California, and nobody had any money. It was 1970, and that's when a lot of people were moving out of San Francisco because they were either tired of the urban thing, the scene had run its course, a number of different reasons, and they were moving up to Mendocino County and Humboldt County. That's just before the pot growing thing happened. We were the first hippies up there, right? And the rednecks didn't like us very much. So there was some conflict there, but there were so many of us in this one particular area outside of Garberville. And I alluded to it in the Lost Coast. What happens is Highway 1 goes up and then it goes inland. So there's no highway along the coast for a good portion of Northern California. So they call that the Lost Coast because you can't really get there easily. And basically nobody had any money, but there was this guy, and he was connected to Owsley, I believe, but he was a major manufacturer of extremely high quality LSD. So he just made it free to the community. So we had an unending source of the best LSD in the world for free. And then so the town was pretty crazy. I mean, it was pretty darn crazy town. You know what I mean? Whitethorn, California. I mean, it was somewhat infamous. It's not the same anymore. Because
there's nobody living there making high quality LSD and supplying.
Oh, I'm sure there is, but the culture is what I'm getting to. I mean, it's not the same culture.
No, gosh, no.
Everybody's really. I think part of it is because I was debating this on a Facebook page with Woodstock just the other day. But are we the establishment? Well, we've become more of the establishment, and the establishment has become more us. And I think, like watching those ads on the commercial, like the idea that those ads exist, if you flash back 55 years, 1968, you never would have seen anything like that. I mean, the first time I saw a bag of pot with a UPC sticker, sales sticker on it, I was just like, it took a little time to gork that, I mean, it's like, okay.
Oh, it's funny, some of the pot programs, now that it's been legal for quite a while here in Canada. But there was a while ago, I was smoking a joint with a friend of mine, and a cop drove by and he threw the joint on the ground and stepped on it right away.
Oh, I know.
Like,
I still go. I still go in the alley. I still, I'm still looking around. I was like, oh shit, But it was pretty serious, and the suppression of the movement. Okay, I got a good story, and this has to do with Whitethorn. Now, in Garberville, and then you go to a little town called Redway, and then you start heading towards the coast, and then you go to a town called Bryceland, right? And then you go out Bryceland, and there's a junction. You either go Shelter Cove and Kings Peak or Whitethorn. Anyway, everything went through Bryceland. Everybody that lived in that area pretty much went through Bryceland on their way home from Garberville, which is where you had to go to get anything normal. So there was a store, a Bryceland store, and they sold like 100 pounds of brown rice, organic brown rice, for like $14.50, and it was like where everybody got their food, and it was also where everybody stopped by and got information, find out what's going on. So life goes on, and also the store would run tabs for people, right? They were even willing to go that far. So life goes on, and there was a kind of a garage type of thing next to it, and all of a sudden, these people moved in, and they were called the Truck Stop, and they basically were like this total party people. Like they were like almost like radicalized party people. In other words, live to party and anything is the establishment. And they started getting a snit with the store because they were accusing the store of being this capitalist thing, and then it just kept getting crazier and crazier, right? And it even came to the point that one night they broke into the store, they burned all the receipts, right? They stole a bunch of stuff. Everything was just getting so friggin' out of hand. And then they disappeared. And I remember being there one night, and there was these people, Claude and Elaine, they called themselves. And they were going, why should you pay for anything? You shouldn't have to pay for everything. Everything, we are all equal. If somebody has a chainsaw and they're not using it, you should be able to go over their house and take their chainsaw. So this huge divide developed between the more back to the land type people that were living there with families and stuff like that, and the party people. And of course, being a musician, I was sort of in between, I mean, I was back to lander, but parties are nice too. So the store hung on for a while, but eventually it closed, right? Right after that, if you found out before that, let's say the cops raided somebody, you'd find out within 12 hours that it happened. After the store closed, you'd find out, if you found out at all, maybe a week later, or maybe 2 weeks later.
They were the information hub.
It broke the communication chain. Now, you can say, oh, that's interesting coincidence. But I have a darker side. I think they were agent provocateurs that went in, radicalized those that could be radicalized, created conflict with the end purpose of shutting down the store, which would inflict this thing. I mean, it was like a study, a CIA, right? I can't accuse the CIA of doing it, but years later, I was up in Oregon, and we were having a reunion of people that had lived down there, and the subject came up, and we were discussing it, and we were discussing Claude and Elaine, and one of them said, yeah, well, we've got confirmation they were spotted under different names in Venezuela soon after that, and more than likely operatives of the federal government. Another incident that happened, there was a few incidences that happened. As a matter of fact, one of the more famous pictures from the Chicago Democratic National Convention of 1968, the police riot, is this guy, this kind of skinny guy, and he's throwing a rock towards the police. Can't prove it, but I have it on fairly reliable sources. That person was actually an operative of the government to foment this problem. So agent provocateurs, and I'm sure it's used all over the world. So you have to assume that it's used here too, and it's a very effective tool. And anytime you got to use a French word to describe something, it's probably not good, like coup d'etat, agent provocateur, like, whoa, man, that must be bad if you can't describe it in English, but they're agents that provoke, essentially. So that is just an example of how it was. But the big killer was heroin. All right. In 1968, there was no heroin in upstate New York in the white community. None. I know this. By 1970, it was pervasive all over campuses and endemic into the hippie community or the alternative community. Okay. If you do the math of who controls the heroin industry, you can come up with all kinds of potential conspiracies to do with that. But if you just look at the facts, why? Because they didn't want heroin get into the white community until it suited their purposes. But look at the black community. That's the only place you could get heroin in New York City, was either on the west side or
and a lot of the there's Wiki and a lot of the other things have exposed a lot of the freedom of information documents that are coming out regarding all of that.
I'm sure, because it's the same. And the same, I saw the same thing in California, in Humboldt County.
Well, we might get hit with a wave of suppression here too. We're hoping we're at a point where things are open enough that we can do things like have this discussion in this broadcast.
Yeah, but, I think it's like anything. I think it's all a matter of degrees. Just because we can do this doesn't mean we're going to get to be able to continue to do this. Or if you get really, really successful, then you're going to be more of a target. Like right now, maybe on a good day, we might have a few hundred, a few thousand people are going to see us. That's wonderful, But if the powers that be see you as a threat, that's when they go to the trouble of doing this stuff. We were a pain in the ass. They didn't want to spend all these resources running around chasing a bunch of kids. I'm sure they had other agendas that they would much rather have done. The peace movement, the anti-war movement, which was way bigger than, say, just the psychedelic movement, that was a major force to be dealt with. And I think the Vietnam War was probably the biggest catalyst to the social change. If you had to pick one, what really tipped the scales, just the blatant cruelty and stupidity of the Vietnam War was it hit us. It hit my generation directly because there was conscription at the time. So we were being forced to go fight this war, and that does not line up with you. American values are not forcing somebody to do something. It's the land of the free, which means you should be able to be what you want, live the way you want, and think the way you want, and speak the way you want. So it was totally diverse to that. I dodged all the bullets, but
you came up here, right?
Yeah, I had to. It's public record, but I was under federal felony indictment in New York for draft evasion and was pursued by the FBI. FBI staked out my aunt's house in Ventura, California. A year later, after I moved to Canada, they were still trying to catch me. I don't know why, but all I can surmise is maybe they saw me individually as some kind of threat.
And why would that be?
Well, that book
So,
was
I mean,
Hey, have
there we go.
told everybody he's the author of this book?
Well, I mean, not today, not yet, but yes, this is.
There is a book.
Steve,
Yeah,
Steve is holding up, and I will hold up.
We're going to be doing all kinds of things with the book. There we go.
You know, we each have our own copy, and just so I can show off, mine is personally autographed to me, to Cindy.
Yay.
See that, right? See.
That's great.
Hey, Greg, how do people get a copy of this book if they want?
Well, we're working on that. I'm working with you a bit on that too. Our hope is to have, I think, 500 copies. It'll be available sometime this spring. We have first edition copies. It's just a matter of getting them all organized and getting them ready for sale and stuff. And but we are going to release at least 500 this spring, and definitely we'll promote it on your show and every other friggin' way. It's a pretty neat book. It's in 135 library systems in the United States. It's also in the Harvard Historical Depository, UC Berkeley, St. John's, 135 library systems anyway, King County and all kinds of stuff. And I'm hoping to release another batch that we're going to specifically market to libraries, because libraries are really cool, because a book, I mean, you guys might read it. I mean, you'll read it and maybe show it to 5, 10, 15 people. But in a library, I had some people come in. I was working at Guitar Center in Seattle, and these customers came in and we were talking. And after the sale, we were just drawing. I mentioned Woodstock, and something went bad, and I mentioned something about a book, and they looked at me and said, "You're the guy that found the slides under your parents' bed?" And we were talking about that earlier. The quick story on that is I took a bunch of pictures. I was a semi-professional photographer at the time of the Woodstock Festival. I managed to get about 72 usable pictures. And soon after the festival, I got them back and I looked at them and I really wasn't impressed, to be honest with you. I was being in the business. There was nothing really there that I thought was outstanding. And like I say, back at that time, Woodstock Festival, like who cares? I mean, it was some rock festival, whatever. It's over, get over it. And then I kind of more or less just forgot about them. But every time I started telling stories, people go, "Well, you should write a book." All right, fine. So anyway, I found the slides, and I borrowed my mother's slide projector and went up to Northern California and went to Shelter Cove, which is up on the Lost Coast. And my friend Altadena and we set up a screen and got ourselves all settled in and started watching these slides. And we were both going like, "Uh-oh, oh my God," because the pictures seem to convey the feeling of the festival in a way that was different. I had a different kind of angle, and the Woodstock Museum curator, said the same thing to me in compliment. So then it was like, okay, great, we got pictures. Let's write a book. Well, geez, I don't know if you ever tried to write a book before, but it's not too easy, especially if it's nonfiction and it's about an iconic event. I started when I walked up the beach with a little handheld recorder. This is like 1999, so there was no talk to your computer and have it all nice and text like today, right? And I just sat on the beach for like about 3 or 4 hours. I still got the tapes, and you can hear seals in the background and stuff. And I just talked this concept of how I saw the timeline in my head of what the book would be. And then Altadena took the tapes, and she was a stenographer, and she turned it into text. And then we started going through the text. It must have been 50,000 words or something, right? And we started going through it and going through it and going through it. Eventually, I found a publisher and an editor, and it took like 8 years. But it was definitely an accomplishment. And we are going to make them available. And they're not, you can't.
I still have a couple of, I think I've got a half a dozen of the ones that you autographed up. And
yeah.
get
Okay,
hold of
I'm going to interrupt one more time. We have just a couple of minutes left, and I've got one question that I would like to give you a couple of minutes just to maybe give us an answer. We have a new psychedelic revolution going on right now. There are all kinds of studies. There are people like Steve that are coming up with amazing things. There are people like us who share our stories and help people maybe find their journey in the psychedelic world. How do you see this psychedelic revolution different from the one in the 60s? I mean, I know that there are obvious differences, but there were medical studies going on back then, and they all came to a halt and got hidden. I mean, we're finding them these days, but I mean, you would have seen some of that, out in the world before they brought that great big halt.
Yeah, well, the biggest difference is that the movement isn't dealing with the level of suppression that we had, especially amongst the mainstream researchers and institutions and stuff like that. They're actually encouraging it. They're using MDMA on soldiers in the United States for post-traumatic stress. So it's society has accepted psychedelics. The majority of Canadians, Americans are not against this, whereas when I was dealing with it, they were. I watched Reefer Madness. They made me watch Reefer Madness. I mean, seriously, we had to go to school and watch Reefer. That's how old I am. So that's a big difference. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, the unregulated, unsupervised, Wild West nature of the psychedelic movement of the 60s and 70s. I mean, you guys it's so organized. You go to the pot shop and it tells you all the different ingredients and stuff like that. You take something and it's like, oh, it's this much this and this much that and this much that. So the combination of those things is massive. It's totally massive. And the use of psychedelics and marijuana and stuff like that, it really falls into two categories. I'm sure you agree. The recreational and the medicinal. Yeah. And I was really encouraged.
And I really hate to interrupt again, but we are honestly out of time. I have to say thank you so much for joining us. We are going to have to bring you back again because I can tell that there are so much more to say.
I still had a bunch of questions.
And Steve didn't even get to his questions, so he's going to have to take his notes and pack them away for the next time we bring you back.
Thank you for being on the show, and thank you for being such an awesome co-host or host.
Oh, thank you for doing this with me. Thank you to Greg for joining our show, and from our friends at the Legacy420.com and the Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. That is our Mushie Moment for today, January 17th, 2023. We will see you next week. We've got a pretty exciting guest coming on for next week, one that so far I've been excited for all of them. So as excited as I was for Greg and John, I am excited for our guest next week, and I can't wait to announce it later on in the week. Listen, everybody, have a great week, and we will see you soon.
Have a fantastic day.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we love you very much. Bye.
Keep the faith.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own, and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
When you have a pain that's reached its peak, Legacy for 20, it's so unique. If organic cannabis is what you seek, here's your trusted partners 7 days a week. Suppository salves, vapes and drops, topicals, edibles, infused pop. Just when life seems like it ain't easy, at Legacy 420, enjoy a pop freezy. Lab tested products, make them the GOAT. Legacy 420 out on your road. Legacy 420 in Tyendinaga Mohawk territory. Indigenous organic cannabis at its finest.
What do you find at paceradio.net? People advocating cannabis education.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more. We've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
We are people advocating cannabis education here at paceradio.net.